Welcome to Whistler's Vital Signs, an initiative of the Community Foundation of Whistler that seeks to connect and engage our community as a means to gauge its overall vitality. Whistler's Vital Signs with your host, Kim Slater, starts now.
The focus of today's podcast is food security. To explore this topic, I'm speaking with Don Johnson on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lil'wat Nation and the Squamish Nation, to whom we owe a tremendous amount of gratitude for sharing of their land. Dawn is the co-founder of Clear Course Consulting, and she holds a diploma in restoration of natural systems. She is deeply involved with a variety of food initiatives, notably working on the Lil'wat Nation Agricultural Plan, which I'm hoping to hear a lot more about in the course of our conversation. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you.
So tell me, what is your interest in food security?
Well, for me, my interest in food security is really about how complex of an issue it is, ultimately. I mean, it's not about just food or economics or any of those things. It's really like a systems issue. And for me, it's really compelling that way. And yeah, I mean, I've got 2 young girls and live in a beautiful, fertile valley, and I'm surrounded by agriculture. And I think it's important now more than ever to start to build that resiliency, because statistically speaking, we're not looking all that great in terms of food security on a global scale. So it's important to start from the ground up.
Yes, it's strange, isn't it? Because access to food is a fundamental human right, but we don't often talk about it. Why is that?
Well, I feel part of it is because it is a complex issue and it's actually not very well understood. So for me, when I was asked to do some presentations about food security, it really actually caused me to think a little bit harder and delve a little bit deeper. So at first, when you think about food security, for me anyway, I automatically go to, in our set area, do we have enough food to feed our people? And that's not really what food security is about. So I think there's a wide misunderstanding about what food security actually is. And a lot of the time people confuse or interchange the terms food security with food sovereignty or food justice, or these terms that we hear a lot these days. But really, food security, like you said, is for people to have access to the food, whether that's economically, physically, socially, that they need in order to live a healthy life. And so when you think about what that actually means, it's really complex. So I think people are talking about food security, but they might not know that's food security that they're talking about because it's such a complex issue.
Right. So it touches on a lot of the entire food system. So agriculture, hunting, foraging, the transport and distribution of food, storage, preparation, retail consumption, and even food waste. Is that right?
Yeah, but even more so, it really is about people being able to access food. So the availability of food is one thing on a land base. And the systems that we have for people to access food on that land base are one thing. But really, what research shows for British Columbia anyway, is the barrier for people to be food secure, so for people to be able to access food, isn't necessarily related to how much food we can grow in British Columbia, or even what that food cost is, but it's actually related to people's income and how much available money they have to spend on food.
When we're talking about food security, are we talking about the individual access to food, or are you thinking more along the lines of at a community level, a community's access to food or security around food, or is it all of those things?
Well, I think it's all of those things, really. I mean, a lot of the research that's been done that demonstrates how we as a country or a community or a society are doing in terms of food security is looking at things on a regional or even a provincial level. And so the data that, is used to measure how food secure we are is larger in scope than the individual, but it also is able to break down on the individual level as well.
That's great you say that. I was actually really curious about what kind of measures there are for food security. How is this something we can measure?
There's been a lot of studies that have been done, and I guess maybe what we can do is just sort of take like a really wide lens and look at food security on a global scale, because, like the United Nations does a lot of research in terms of food security. And what they find is that food security is really on a global scale. It has experienced a time of food security being more secure, I suppose. But recently, in the last few years, we're starting to experience more and more food insecure places. So on a global scale, that's being contributed to things like global warming, which is resulting in more natural disasters, conflict, war. People aren't able to access their agricultural fields when they don't feel secure. And so these things are actually on a global scale really influencing food security. But then when we look at Canada as a whole, some of the big influences for food security are those things that we talked about. So income and people's earnings are really linked to how Canadians can afford food and how they feed themselves.
And so some of the vulnerabilities for our region, so coming down from the national level and even BC, in terms of, say, corridor communities, what sort of vulnerabilities exist here around food?
As we know, here in Whistler, it's not the ideal growing climate. Right. So Whistler's not really an agricultural area per se. Squamish and Pemberton are. So if we're looking at it like a sea to sky corridor perspective, I think that there's some really great strengths that sort of bookend Whistler particularly. But then, Whistler's such an anomaly. We have, obviously our land base can't support the amount of people that come in and utilize our food on a regular basis. So in terms of our land base can support the people that use our land base, the question's probably pretty easy to answer there. But yeah, I mean, we've got really great strengths for organizations that work in the corridor on food security specifically. So, there's some really great work that's happening down in Squamish with the Helping Hands Society. There's the Whistler Food Bank has got really, really strong roots and great programs. Up north in the northern end of the corridor, we've got the Pemberton Food Bank, we've got Stewardship Pemberton Society, and also a lot of great people working on regional food initiatives as well. So really, in terms of like the social supports to foster food security, there's a lot of great organizations that already exist. We've also actually got the Squamish Food Policy Council that works on policy issues related to food. So there's a lot of great people that are already working on this in the corridor. But then actually when we look at the cost of food in BC, the statistics say that 1 in 10 people in BC are food insecure, which means they don't have the access to the type of food that they feel they need to nourish their bodies. So whether that's physically or emotionally or socioeconomically, they can't afford the food. They're not able to access the food. And actually also 1 in 6 children in families across BC, their families feel that they are not feeding them as well as they could. So we feel in the corridor that this issue might not be as visible, I guess, as a society, I'd say. But if we look at it from a provincial context, the statistics show that we are vulnerable.
Yeah, those are some really worrying statistics. And it sounds like, is there a trend, a negative trend that I'm picking up on if we are moving from a time when there was more security around food to one in which there is more precarity? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not immune to climate change here as well, right? And so even though we have this really great growth in the agricultural industry and great farmers markets and all of these things that are happening to support growing on a local level, it's, I think, more and more challenging for people in agriculture from a growing perspective, from like a food production perspective. But then really in BC, just touching back and circling back to that part about income, really, food costs in BC statistically over the last 5 years or so are increasing by about 10%, but our wage increase is 3.25% statistically over
considerable gap.
The same time frame. So, yeah, and then when these studies were done to look at food security in BC, what they found is that people that have lower income are just spending so much more, such a higher percentage of their income on food. So for somebody that's living on social assistance, it's 44%. They spend 44% of their income on food. Minimum wage is 24% and medium wage is 14%. So really, like, the information really shows this clear correlation between income and food security. So in BC, the research that's been done points to supporting people to have better income in order to address food security.
Wow. I'm curious, when you were hosting the Vital Cafe, was this a surprise to folks in the room? I'm curious to know what their perceptions were around food and the strengths and weaknesses within our corridor communities.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people expected to have a conversation about agriculture and about farming. And really, when we talk about food security, that study that's been done and that research that's been done really points to this need, right, to frame the conversation about food security to be an income-based problem in BC that requires an income-based solution. And so there's a lot of different things, and like I say, part of the compelling attraction for me in terms of understanding food security is because it is this complex issue. And so addressing it from, a agricultural perspective or a charitable perspective is just one small piece of that puzzle. So the other puzzle pieces are around income and around, these social supports, and really like leveraging all of these amazing opportunities that exist within our regional organizations and seeing how they can really work together for more impactful outcomes.
Yeah, it's really a core resiliency issue.
Yes.
And it makes me think that it's really one that requires a strengthening of the social fabric. So in thinking about how food itself is such a relational sort of enterprise, it means working together with other people to grow and harvest and to share food. It's something we do as a social activity. It seems to me that our approaches to addressing the complexity of this issue require these partnerships across these social agencies that you're talking about and a real collective approach.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. One solution isn't going to do much. We all have to think about all of our individual strengths and how we can weave that all together.
So tell me, what are you most enthusiastic about on the food file? So I know there's so much going on here. You've shared some of the great work that some organizations are doing, but anything that's particularly innovative or partnership based, something that's kind of getting at the complexity of this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly lucky because I get to work on really diverse projects throughout the corridor. And I mean, the regional initiative that's happening right now with the Whistler Centre for Sustainability is really great because it touches on some of the strengthening of that fabric in the food network, that resiliency. And really, it brings the right people to the table to really try to address some of the root causes of, I don't want to say failure, but like gaps in our current food system, and looks to find, some innovative ways to solve those problems. So that's a really exciting regional initiative, but I don't know, I know it sounds funny and small, but the beekeeping industry, or not, I guess not industry, but practice is really growing, I think.
Is it kind of like a part of a guerrilla gardening approach? It's just like literally setting down roots into, kind of open spaces, and it's a real kind of direct action. I know that it happens in different urban landscapes.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's just beekeepers in general are fairly aware of their surroundings, just because if you're not going to be successful as a beekeeper. It requires a really holistic viewpoint and an understanding of complex ideas and some real critical thinking. I know that sounds like a funny example of why I'm excited, but in reality, one out of every 3 bites of food that we take as a Western society relies upon bees. So, and bees, as most people probably know, are really, they're calling them a keystone species. So their impact is greater than just what they're able to provide, right? So,
and they're under threat.
And they're under threat right now. So, that's really exciting to see a lot of excitement around bees. Some of the work that's happening in the northern end of the corridor with Liwat Nation is really amazing as well. And I love to see, some of those projects getting up and off the ground.
Tell me about some of those projects. What's happening up in the corridor there?
Yeah, so with Liwat Nation, a number of years ago, there was an agricultural plan that was created. And really, the vision of that plan was for Liwat people to feed Liwat people. And even though I'm not directly involved in the project at this very moment, I was helping them to develop the project for grant funding. So they've received some support and are now underway in implementing their agricultural plan. So that's a really long-term project. And the opportunities to thrive there are really endless. I mean, you've got a lot of beautiful, fertile land that's adjacent to an area like the Pemberton Valley that's already received a lot of really great attention and, great strength from a marketing and sales perspective. They've already kind of like paved the way almost for agriculture in the agritourism sector and, that niche market of, Pemberton potatoes and all of these great things that we're able to grow. And so the Liwat project is not necessarily at this time focused around selling for like some of the small scale farms in Pemberton are, but in time I think that that's an area that they'll be looking to explore. And so to be able to leverage and draw from those strengths from some of the small scale organic farmers in the Pemberton Valley is just, it seems like a great way to go. And also, when we talk about Indigenous food sovereignty, so the ability for the nation to feed themselves and to connect to the land and to connect to some of the traditional practices that have happened with agriculture as well as the conventional practices now are really exciting. And it's not just about agriculture, it's about reawakening this deep body of knowledge that they've held for many generations.
Wow, that sounds really, really exciting. How can folks support that work? Is it a matter of getting to know food producers? Is it donning your beekeeper's outfit and, learning more about, is it called apiary, being an apiologist? Is that right?
Yeah.
Or what would you suggest? What are some things that folks can do who are really interested in this issue to feel like they're kind of making a difference around food security?
Yeah, so food security specific?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the biggest things is being aware of what's happening with your food waste. We as individuals all have a really great ability to impact food security by just not wasting as much. Just be a little bit more mindful about what you're buying and what goes into your compost or even garbage.
There's some truly shocking statistics around food waste.
Yes.
It's just billions of dollars basically just thrown away.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, support your local farmers market. That's just an easy one. There's so many great farms locally that have community-supported agricultural programs. You can sign up for harvest boxes, buy local. It helps with greenhouse gas emissions. We all know that, eating local is better for the environment. It's better for our bodies.
Which is also eating seasonally.
Eating seasonally as well, exactly. And I think, just there's so many great gardening initiatives as well. And I think for me, it's about how can I take action for my family to be independently food secure, right? So it's like you're not relying on rising food costs necessarily because it's building your own resiliency to grow your garden.
And you have a fantastic garden. Every time I bike by your place, I always have a little bit of garden envy.
It's a jungle, but it's very productive.
Yeah, it seems to me that food is this perfect sort of entry point to talk about a lot of these other issues that for some don't feel as close at hand, and thinking about climate change. Sometimes that seems really sort of, overly scientific, or there's a lot of dimensions that are not something that necessarily people kind of experience. But I feel like food is, you're literally getting your hands in the dirt. And so some of those relationships just, I feel like make themselves be visible or come to be known by osmosis. You're just in it, and it makes you start to think about all of these different, the relational quality of food. Yeah.
And also, from a healing perspective, there's so many benefits to growing your food and being connected to the land. And so, I mean, I know it's not possible for everybody. I know that growing food we're a busy society, and I fully recognize that, but there's just so many wonderful benefits from growing your own food. It's not just about the eating. So,
all right. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today, Dawn, and all the great work that you're doing on this really important topic. If
And like all good things, this edition of Whistler's Vital Signs has come to an end. Please be sure to turn on your notifications and join us for our next installment. Whistler's Vital Signs is a podcast series developed to help distribute the facts and findings as contained in the annual Vital Signs Whistler Report and related programs. For more information on Whistler's Vital Signs, please visit the Community Foundation of Whistler online at whistlerfoundation.com. Whistler's Vital Signs podcasts are brought to you by the Vancouver Foundation, the Community Foundation of Whistler, and 101.5 Whistler FM.